Hello everyone, you are listening to the Earful Tower podcast. My name is Oliver G. This show is brought to you by French Today audiobooks to help you learn French. More on them at the end of the episode, but I'll tell you now, if you go to frenchtoday.com/earful6, you're going to get a further 10% discount off all your language learning audiobooks there. But we'll get back to them at the end of the episode. And before I get into this episode with Diana from the Land of Desire, the podcaster, I want to share a bit of news, some big news even, about the Earful Tower podcast, and that is that just last night I was sitting in a beautiful little hotel in Pigalle called, and I recommend this to you all, it's called Hôtel Amour, which means the love hotel. No, it's not that kind of hotel, not the kind of hotel you'll find 100 meters further up in the red light district of Pigalle. No. This is just a beautiful little... there's a bar downstairs that's out in the garden, really beautiful as long as not too many people are smoking, and they weren't, and I was in there having a lovely Aperol Spritz with my lovely wife, and I checked my phone, and what did I see? That since the Eiffel Tower has begun, as of last night, there have been 500,000 downloads. That's 500,000 downloads, which... for me is incredible. I don't know, maybe you're the kind of person who's impressed by 1 million downloads. Me, I can't believe it. 2 years in, 500,000 downloads, and I'm over the moon. It means people are out there listening. I've managed to turn this into a job, and this is the kind of news I think needs to be celebrated. So, what I'm going to do is launch Season 6 today. You are now listening to Season 6 of the Eiffel Tower, and what I'm going to do, I mean, it doesn't really mean anything tangible in terms of the show that will change, but there will be one change, and that's going to be 2 episodes a week, Monday and Thursday. Hey, it's a job now. Let's get into it. Monday, Thursday, episodes of the Eiffel Tower. There'll be little changes you'll notice coming up. I'm going to experiment with a bit, and I'd love your feedback, but 2 a week. It's the 6th season, or if you're a history nerd, you'll see that in France, every so often they decide to call it a new republic. So right now we're in the 5th republic, and when I first heard about it, it didn't really make sense to me. I thought every now and again they just wanted to shuffle things around and call it a new republic, and I was kind of inspired by that idea that I'd shuffle things around and call it a new republic here as well. So we're in the 6th republic. You history readers out there will know that there are actually big changes when there's a new republic in France. In fact, this 5th republic came with a new president. They didn't used to do presidents. They used to do prime ministers. And it was all about a conflict in Algeria. But we're not going to get into history now because I'm doing the introduction. This whole podcast is about history. But anyway, thank you. I want to send a big thank you firstly to all the listeners for downloading this show and for continuing to do it. I want to say a big thank you to the sponsor of the show, French Today. Thanks for helping me with this journey, and also a big thank you to the Patreon supporters, the members of this website who have, I've said it before and I'll say it again, without them I would have given up on this a long time ago. So thank you to you all for all your help. Now, as we get into the 6th Republic of the Eiffel Tower, I want to introduce you to today's guest. It's Diana from the Land of Desire, which is a podcast about French history in France, France history, even, as you'll hear in the episode, even how the French history has inspired other countries sometimes. So she does these great podcast episodes that delve very deep into stories from the pages of France's history. And I would encourage you to go and listen to it. Go and subscribe. Help another podcaster out and learn a little bit more about this wonderful country of France. So without further ado, I'm going to press play on that episode. Welcome to the 6th season of the Eiffel Tower. Thank you for listening, and be sure to hang around at the end where I'll chat to you again and read out a few interesting French phrases that I've learned from French Today. But let's get started. It's the 6th Republic. You know what? Instead of the intro music, I'm going to play the Marseillaise, the French national anthem. It's a day that should be celebrated. Let's get into it. Diana, welcome to the studio.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So it's not Diane.
No.
Do people say Diane?
They do it constantly.
Really? Because in your podcast, when I was looking into your podcast a little bit, there's not much of your name and, it's France and history, isn't it?
It is, but I start every episode by always saying, welcome to the show. This is Diana, your host. And I remember I had somebody write in once and say, what does beyond the new mean? And I realized it's because I have a terrible pronunciation of welcome. I've just been saying bienvenue.
Oh, when you say bienvenue, beyond the new.
I sound like Peggy Hill from King of the Hill trying to speak
amazing.
French. Bienvenue. And I
what did you respond? Were you like, I don't know, just go with it?
Oh, I mean, it was the first time I'd had my French pronunciation corrected by somebody who wasn't even French. Like Whoa. It was, bless their, it was so sweet.
How good is your French?
Pas très bon.
Okay.
Oh non, pas très bien.
Who cares? The main thing is, as anyone who listens to this show knows, is that you give it a go and that you're understood,
Most of it is just, being incredibly polite and falling over yourself to apologize for not speaking it better. I remember somebody saying once that, particularly in France, the French language is itself one of the most beautiful exports of the country. And, most countries don't have the Académie Française to especially in the U.S. and English, it's what do they call it? A mongrel language. It just picks up anything from anywhere. So if you have this beautiful language, which is itself a work of art, of course you'd want to be respectful.
That's true.
It's like coming to Paris and ignoring the Louvre.
I agree with you. I think you're right. Although I also think English is a very beautiful language because it's a mongrel language. I think it's really interesting. It's so it's so welcoming and adapting to everything.
It reminds me of an amoeba, or a gas just expanding to fill a container.
Whereas French is like a rolling stone, just gathering nothing. Like a new word comes in from English, like email, and like not having it, having it.
My mother still remembers the exact moment when I think it would have been the 70s or the 80s, when the Académie Française argued amongst themselves for weeks and weeks, and then finally had to settle on the term for a babysitter. I think someone can fact check me on this. I think they actually just settled on le babysitter.
Well, yeah,
and it's just c'est quoi c'est baby.
Yeah. It's weird because the French people, even though the Académie Française is very against using words like babysitter, email, hashtag, and they often come up with translations, the French are pretty cool with using these English words and just putting a le on the start. So I feel like the international press often exaggerates it, especially in England, where they sort of have no time for this kind. They mock the French people. And they go.
The English mock the French, I've never.
So they make a big deal about it, but in France, walking around, people are quite happy. Like you wouldn't hear any French person say whatever the equivalent for hashtag became, mot dièse or something like that. No one does it. I wonder how exaggerated those stories are.
Actually, this is a genuine question. I've been trying to figure out. I know what I can read online, but I don't know what's used like in the streets. What is the word for podcasts that people actually use? Did they just...
They definitely say podcast.
Yeah, they just say podcast. Yeah. There is technically a word, according to the Academy. And it's some nonsense I've never heard a human being say.
Yeah, it'll be like, there'd be a translation for it. Yeah. So I'm actually in a WhatsApp thread with like a bunch of the main podcast hosts in France. And it's crazy French. I don't know what's going on half the time. Like, honestly, they're using these really weird words, but they all say podcast. But I've noticed in France that a lot of people can't pronounce it, and they say podcast like that, which sounds more, like from the Middle East or something.
I was gonna say, I think it sounds like a Polish stew.
Yeah, it certainly does. Anyway, we didn't come here to talk about Polish stews, but we did come to talk about podcasts. And yours, The Land of Desire, tackles history in France. And as we're talking history in France, perhaps, not just history and France, you're not delving into other countries.
Occasionally I will when there's a crossover with French history. So I recently did an episode on the history of the banh mi, which is mostly an exploration of French Indochine, and its relationship. What's that colonial relationship like, and how did that spin out over the course of the 20th century? And A lot of Vietnamese food is deeply and obviously inspired by French food. So occasionally there'll be crossover because France doesn't always have neat boundaries.
Sure, but there's always that tether back to France, right? And before we hit the record button here, we were talking about history in different countries, and I was wondering whether other countries have more interesting histories than this country, the Hexagon, as people call France. And you said, Oliver, don't be ridiculous. You said France is by far the most interesting country when it comes to history. I'd like you. Is that what you said?
Well, first of all, I'm still in Paris. I'm still within the national border, so I'm not going to say anything that begins a diplomatic incident. So
you can if you want. It'd be great.
I have to go board a train in a moment. I want them to let me on. I would argue that France certainly has some of the most interesting history, particularly because it is such the territory of France has been, compared to other parts of Europe, so consistent, so steady. Yes, we switch Alsace-Lorraine back and forth every 80 years or so, but other than that, I just came from Hamburg a few days ago, and you look at it, and Hamburg's been independent. For a while it was France. Now it happens to be Germany, a country that didn't even exist formally on paper, 150 years ago. There's some principalities in other parts of Europe that have switched. I was reading recently that someone's grandparents live, I think, somewhere in Hungary, and they've changed countries 6 times in the last 70 years without ever leaving their town.
Really? Wow.
So you have an area like France, which has a lot of territorial integrity, and it's a neat thought experiment to see how thousands and thousands of years can start to accrete and build up on top of one another, and eventually you get to be an archaeologist and excavate and compare one layer of that history to another.
Isn't there a fancy word for that I don't understand?
I was just talking about the term palimpsest.
Palimpsest.
Which is...
sounds like a Polish stew to me.
So originally the idea of a palimpsest, I believe, is when you are... If you're writing something down, especially if you're using a quill, for example, and you have to press down a little bit to make that impression onto the paper, and when you lift up the paper and you take it away, you'll see the impression of what you were writing on the piece of paper below. It's like, an old Pink Panther, Inspector Clouseau's sketching on a notepad to try to reveal the message underneath. So that's a palimpsest, and you see that idea coming up in history a lot, where you can reveal layers of unknown history lingering underneath something else that was visible to the naked eye.
Interesting. It's kind of like when they excavate something and then they find something else.
It's like in Mexico City when they were building the subway station, and as they were excavating, they came across a bunch of medieval ruins. I'm sure it happens in Paris all the time. I'm sure when they were building the metro, I'm sure they were just constantly stumbling across things.
They still are. One of my two things. One of my favorite things in the whole city is the Philippe Auguste wall, the one that used to circle the city, and the biggest remaining chunk of it is down where I play basketball. And they found that I don't remember it exactly now. I did an episode about it, but they found it when they were excavating something after World War II. That recently, and that's why there's this big chunk of the wall in the middle of the Marais that remains.
One of my favorite examples of this in Paris is if you go to the Louvre, and it was wonderful. I just got to take my mom to the Louvre. She's never been before. And if you go down to the basement of the Louvre, and you'll be able to see the medieval castle foundations underneath.
How cool.
So the Louvre, here's a perfect example of it. It used to be like basically a fort to keep the English out, and then it was a medieval beautiful castle, and then we knocked that one down and we built a Renaissance beautiful castle. But there's still layers of all of those different civilizations and settlements underneath. And you can, in the case of the Louvre, literally just walk downstairs and see them. Walk down through the Renaissance. You can start at the pyramid, walk through the pyramid, and see shards of the 20th century, and then walk through the Renaissance, and then climb down the stairs into the Middle Ages.
It's a palimpsest. Plasmcest.
You really nailed it.
What is it? Say it again.
Palimpsest.
Palimpsest. Yeah. How interesting. It reminds me when I moved to Paris. So I'm from Australia, where we don't have the same kind of historical buildings and stuff like that, And I mean, it's probably the same in San Francisco.
Right. We have this wonderful habit of having the earth shake every 200 years and everything wiggles down and, we have to rebuild from the rubble.
Wow. But here,
thanks for reminding me of that, by the way. Appreciate it.
So I was living in the second hour in this one, and I'd been there for a couple of weeks or something, and they were building a new... I feel like I maybe said this on the show recently, or maybe I just told someone, so you guys get to hear it twice. But they were building a new floor at the bottom of Monoprix, the supermarket, and digging down, and they found 800 year... it must have been, I think, 100 skeletons from an 800-year-old hospital that used to be there. And they were like, well, fancy that. And everyone just kept going on with their shopping. And I was standing there like, what is going on? Like the oldest thing in Perth, where I'm from, was the lady next door. And compare that to what I was standing in the middle of, I was just like, wow, you would have loved it.
I mean, you come to San Francisco, and the oldest freestanding building we have, it's these little bits of the Spanish mission left, and which we're all extremely proud of because the mission is about as old as my country, and of course that's slightly younger than the hotel I'm staying at.
Wow!
So,
how old is this mission building? Do you know? Mission?
Oh gosh, I think 1770s.
Right. That's when Australia was settled by the British as well. 1770. Yes. Anyway, so your podcast, History, France. Firstly, we should ask you what's this obsession with France? Where did that seed get planted? You don't know. You were so gobsmacked that you forgot to talk.
You would think after about 3.5 years running this podcast that I would have a better answer to that question, but I don't.
You spent time here though, right?
I did. I lived here. I first moved here when I was 19, and it was just a really perfect place to be 19 and broke. There's a long, illustrious history of 19-year-olds moving to Paris to be broke.
Sure.
And so I decided to keep up that tradition. This was like 2008, so the economy decided to explode halfway through, and I thought, well, yeah, Redlam is this will work out. Probably shouldn't steal any bread while I'm here.
Right.
But it was a very formative experience, and I've always had a love of history my whole life, but coming as I do from an area that tends to shake out its history every 100 or so years, it was really incredible to come to France and be able to see things. I remember I couldn't believe they just let me touch those buildings.
Yeah. You just walk around touching everything.
I still do.
You set off so many alarms in the Louvre.
Yeah, I'm on a watch list. But I still do to this day. I just took my mom around the corner to was the Hotel de Sens, just to point out the cannonball that's still stuck in the wall up high. No one's bothered to pry it out. And I'm just thinking like that cannonball has been up there longer than my state has existed.
Right. What is it, 1830? Is that when it was up there?
Yeah, we
Second
still got
French Revolution. It says it underneath.
It's 1830. It's the Trois Glorieuses, and we've still got about 25 years before anybody discovers gold.
Yeah,
so
right.
California is just a bit of a weird outpost at that point.
That's what I love about Paris, though, and that place where you just mentioned, that cannonball is right by the wall, which similar to what you said. There's all these kids kicking soccer balls against that wall, and and leaning against it. I'm like, that could be in a museum. What's going on? Anyway, back to your podcast. You do a lot of research. I can imagine. You can't just know all that stuff, right? How long does it take you to make an episode?
It's a bit hard to put a number on it because oftentimes I'm reading about a lot of different subjects at once so that I can start working on multiple episodes at a time. So, for example, right now I'm doing a series on Notre Dame, of course, and so I started doing that research shortly after the fire, but I'm also pulling on a lot of books that I've read as some of those books I read for the first time when I was 19, walking around Paris. So lifetime of reading, finally getting to pay dividends. And it just gets supplemented by the research I'm doing in scholarly journals and historical texts and academic texts and so on. So I'd say it's hard for me to put a number on it because I love reading and I'd be doing it anyway. It's probably
That's cool.
20 hours of research.
Wow.
And then,
It's
of course, the
clear
actual-
to me that you love what you're doing, like it's definitely a lot of it shines through. I was listening to the bee episode as I walked to meet you. That was really fun.
I had it was, bless their hearts, I thought it was so sweet after the fire at Notre Dame. Of all the things, of all the reactions that I heard from a lot of my listeners who were, of course, incredibly upset about it, but I had so many people write in on Twitter. They emailed me, they contacted me on Facebook, and they all sent me messages letting me know that the bees had survived.
Right. That was like the happy story of it all, wasn't it?
It was. I had a listener who was in Paris at the time, and she went over with her camera and she like zoomed in as close as she could, and she said,
So
"See?"
close that she could see the bees.
She could see the bees.
Oh my goodness.
I asked her, "Please go away. They're very angry and scared.
Yeah.
You're gonna get stung."
You talked about that guy Audric in that episode, the beekeeper. I met him, and he took me down into the catacombs to see where he stores
The mead.
Yeah. And I wanted to do some kind of thing on it, but he wouldn't let me film too much down there because there's these urban explorers that come and will break in and not just steal his mead, but ruin it. And he's a lovely guy, but his English isn't extremely strong. So I couldn't really do a podcast episode either. So it's been one of those things that's been on the eternal back burner.
I love hearing about all of the urban explorers down there. I did an episode about the catacombs, and my favorite thing that I learned about was the group that goes around and uses the catacombs to creep in at night into historic landmark buildings and fix things that have had like a bureaucratic holdup. So apparently they went in and fixed a clock somewhere, like a historic clock.
Yeah, I read that
no one knew, and then all of a sudden there's a tour guide giving a tour through this museum. The clock starts going, and they go, "What?" It's like,
oh, I love that.
That hasn't rung in 100 years.
What a cool story. I've got to find that. I'm going to try and find that and link it in the show notes below. That's fun. I met a guy that does, his friend is one of these urban explorers, and he'd go down at night, not to fix things, but they'd break into places and have like parties, like civilized parties apparently, but they'd bring down a bunch of beers. They'd go into like a swimming pool or something, and then they'd just sort of party. And then the creepiest thing about it all is he said sometimes when they'd be leaving, later, people would block them in. So there's these kind of anti-urban explorers, and they will see them go in or whatever. They'll walk around and they'll sort of lock up or block off the manhole covers so they can't get back out. And this guy was like, he was freaking out. They're down in the catacombs. There's no way out. So they'd have to explore and find a new way out, and they'd end up popping out through a school or something like that.
You actually reminded me of if you want a great example of a palimpsest or of this kind of accretionary history, the catacombs are one of my favorite examples of this, because originally the catacombs were the limestone quarries, the same limestone that helped build Notre Dame, the limestone that built all of the Haussmann buildings that line all the streets. So that goes back to as far as Roman times. So you had Romans in there excavating all that limestone, and then over the next, thousands and thousands of years, we kept excavating all that limestone until eventually we had excavated so much of it that the city streets just start collapsing, and we had this spree of collapsed streets all over the place until we filled it in with the bones. So we've got the revolutionaries start to move in, and so I'm sure we've got some. After the revolution, we buried a lot of those dead folks down in the catacombs. We moved the skeletons from the medieval courtyards into the catacombs. So we've got this foundation of, I'm sure a lot of Romans died down there. Then we've got the medieval dead who've been moved there after the plague. After that, you've got the revolutionary dead stacked on top of them. And then you start to get up into the modern times, and we know that the Nazis used the catacombs for all kinds of nefarious deeds. And you just reminded me that recently someone was poking around a high school, and they opened up a closet in one of their classrooms, And in the back of the closet was this door, and no one knew what the door. This is turning into a Narnia story.
I was going to say the same thing.
And they opened the door, and it turned out to be like a back entrance into the catacombs.
Crazy.
That when they went inside, they found all this memorabilia from. Maybe that's not the right word.
Say Nazi memorabilia?
Yeah, that's not the right word. They found all these traces of World War II that had been left behind by people who I'm not sure which side of things, but someone was hiding out there during the war.
That's so crazy. I often wonder how much of that stuff remains in Paris. That's still used, but that's been forgotten. There's a bar down in the Marais. Don't remember the name of it. But you go. Yeah, I wish I could remember what it's called. But you go upstairs, and there's like a bathroom or whatever. So it's the toilet is upstairs, and then there's a closet at the end of the hallway. And if you open the closet, you can walk through, and there's an extra bar. And when I went there, someone told me they go through the closet, and I went in and no one was there. There's no bartender or anything. It's just it's like a lounge with really nice chairs, and it got me thinking, like how many corridors there are that are blocked off. Like one day, the owner of that restaurant might just leave the closet there, and then how long before we find it?
Can I give an anecdote that's not about France?
I encourage it. Why not?
So I'm about to head out and go to London a little bit, and I'm taking my mother on a grand tour. And I'm going to take her to my single favorite example of living history, which is actually in Westminster Abbey, the world's oldest wooden door.
Okay.
And it is, somebody was looking at the floor plans of Westminster Abbey one day, and they realized, of all the parts of this abbey that have fallen and been rebuilt and burned and then been rebuilt and they've been shelled and then been rebuilt, this door, nothing's happened to this door. I wonder how old it is. Wooden doors don't last a long time. They erode. They get rained on. Someone backs into them holding something heavy. And so they took a core sample of this door, and they realized it had been standing there in place since William the Conqueror.
Really?
Like William the Conqueror probably walked
years.
through that door. And so I went there, and I freaked out, and I was so excited. I took a bunch of pictures in front of it. I'm sure I attracted a lot of really weird and curious stares. I think we got some tourists taking pictures of me freaking out about this completely nondescript door. And then one day, my third visit to the door, I suddenly see this staff member come over, and I think, oh, this is it. They're going to open the door. I am going to see what is behind the world's oldest
the Holy Grail
door.
Yeah.
It could be anything. It could be Queen Elizabeth's stuff could be back there. It is the bones of William the Conqueror. And they open it, and it's cleaning supplies.
No. What?
Then this woman went in, and she took out a mop. She took out a bunch of 409. And no, I loved it. I thought it was incredible.
I'm not so sure.
There's probably been medieval monks using that as a storage closet for their mead since,
That would be more exciting though if Audric the beekeeper was, or whoever the British version is, was storing their meat in there.
I mean, I don't know what else is going on
well,
behind the mops.
Maybe there's another door behind the mops.
It's just doors on doors on doors.
Yeah. So where is this exactly for our London history lovers?
So you can see that you're walking into, I'm blanking on the name of it. It's the 12-sided room where you'd go in for contemplation and prayer. To walk into that room, you'll have to pass the world's oldest door. Okay. I think for weirdos like me, they've now erected a tiny little historical plaque.
Yeah.
So if you're on the hunt for it, they'll be happy to point it out to you for the 5 people a year that come to Westminster Abbey to look at the door.
Don't forget, a lot of the people that clicked on this very episode are probably big history fans. Let's not forget that. We could be sending a few people there. But back to Paris to finish up, because time's getting away, and I feel like I could talk to you a lot longer. Similar to that door in London, I wonder if there are little things that you love to see in Paris, sort of little hidden secrets that you make a beeline for want of a better word.
I think this one, it's part of the problem of being a history nerd is that I have no sense of what's common knowledge and what's not. So in my head, this is really well known, but it occurs to me that if you are just kind of you're just passing through Paris and history isn't necessarily your jaunt, this might not be on your radar. There are still 3 half-timbered buildings left over, like ancient medieval Paris, still left over on the Ile de la Cité, and then, or no, just below the Marais. And you have to think about it. This is a Paris that's been wiped out with fires and wars, and then more fires, and then more wars, and just constant shelling. And now the Prussians are here, and somebody else is gone. And in all of this time, you have these ancient medieval buildings that somehow have managed not to get burned. They've managed not to get shelled. They haven't been demolished. They still look like something out of Robin Hood, and they're just, you can see the timber sticking out of them, and they're just heggledy-peggledy squished between some beautiful new flat of apartments and some very classical Renaissance architecture. And just to look at this incredible array, all three of them right there, and then underneath, there's a Monoprix. And I love seeing that. So if you seek those out, they're a trip. They're just nestled in to tiny secret corners. Like
these are three separate ones in three different locations.
Two of them are next to one another. I was just there yesterday, and I'm blanking on where they were. One of them is located just below the Rouvier du Temple.
Yeah, so the one that you're talking about is for a tangible address, there's the Peloton Cafe, right, which is on Rue Saint Louis Philippe, I think. I mentioned them. They've been on the show before. Good guys. If you head away from the river, head away from the river from them, turn right. Don't know the name of the street. I feel like it could be...
That's one of them.
Véron or something like that. Miron. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the name of the street is. Up from the Peloton, turn right, and it's on your left immediately. But yeah, that's beautiful. There's a listener to this show that lives in that building. Yeah, I went in. It's amazing. It's more amazing outside, though.
You can stay in Nicolas Flamel's house.
Yeah.
It's an auberge.
Yeah. And now there's a restaurant at the bottom with a Harry Potter menu. Have you seen that? For kids.
No, I walked by it yesterday because I wanted to get a picture of the all the carvings that he himself carved into it in 1407.
Wow.
And they're still there today. You can and they let me touch it.
I'd like to go for a walk with you around Paris one day and just see you just touching all the walls and pushing all the doors.
You just get a lot of splinters probably at the end of it, but they'd be historical splinters.
Yes, yeah. Nicolas Flamel splinters. Tell me, final question, when are you next in Paris?
That's a good question. Hopefully soon.
Good, because when we see each other again, we'll do another podcast episode and maybe a little walk around the town, touching walls and...
It'll be great. We'll get arrested at the end, and we'll have a wonderful set of stories to tell.
I do them live. It's yet to happen, an arrest on the show, but it would be an honor if the first was with you, Diana. So until then, thank you for being on the Eiffel Tower.
Thanks so much for having me.
And everybody, go and check out her podcast, The Land of Desire. If you know how podcasts work, you'll be able to figure it out. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
And beyond, what was it? Beyond
Beyond the New.
Beyond the New with the Eiffel Tower and The Land of Desire. So there you have it. That was the first interview of the Sixth Republic. Thank you, Diana, for coming into the studio in Paris. Go and check out her podcast, The Land of Desire. You know how podcasts work. Go and hit that subscribe button there as well. And like I said in previous weeks, if you're listening to this and you haven't hit the subscribe button on the Eiffel Tower, what are you doing? Go and hit it. Hit that button. Now, what I do at the end of episodes is I usually read out a little bit of Gmail. But I'm going to do it a little bit. It is the new season after all. And then I go through a bit of the French today. So first, instead of reading out an email, I'm going to tell you a funny story that happened just the other day. A regular listener by the name of Charlotte Pleasance, was, I bumped into her in the Peloton Cafe. And she said, she's talking about the show. And she said, I like how you encourage people to subscribe on other people's phones. And I said, well, did you do it? And she said no, but then she turned around. Her friend's phone was sitting on the very bar, at the coffee shop. She grabbed it, subscribed to it, put it back down. So I don't know if her friend figured out, but that's what I like to hear, and even more what I like to see. So thanks, Charlotte. And Charlotte is going to be an upcoming guest on the show, I believe, talking about being creative, Paris, Shakespeare, all that kind of stuff. So that's my Gmail, my email for this week, even though it wasn't really an email. And I want to end on a few things that I've written down from French Today. So if you're new around here, perhaps this is the first episode you've ever listened to, the sponsor of this show is French Today, and they do audiobooks teaching you French. And what I've been doing for this whole year so far is I've been doing the audiobooks and I've been noting down interesting instances of sort of language quirks or phrases that I didn't know or that I thought I'd like to share with you. So I've got 4 written down today that I'm going to share. But first, I just want to stress, if you want to learn French as well, go on FrenchToday.com, and then after writing .com, you put /earful6, and they immediately take a further 10% off all your audiobooks. So go and check that out, maybe while I'm talking to you. Let's have a look here. I've written 4 things that I've learned from, I'm up to audiobook 6, right near the end of it. One I've written down, I've heard it before, I've used it before, but I think you guys will like it as well. If someone asks you how you're doing, some people will respond with impeccable, which is a great word in English anyway, but in French it's the same, it's impeccable, but they take it a step further, and they do this thing that's very common, a very particular thing that the French people do. They shorten their words, so instead of saying impeccable, they say impec, I-M-P-E-C, and in the study guide from Camille's books on French Today, she writes, short for impeccable, it means great, and in familiar French, we often shorten longer words. Appart for appartement, which we all learned from David Leibovitz's book earlier this year. Après-midi for après-midi, and apéro for apéritif. They love to do it. They shorten words. It's a good example as well from French Today about how she teaches. You hear it, but there's also the written explanations. But when I first heard impec, I was going through a check-in at an airport in Paris, and I always ask people how they're doing. If you've heard the show before, you know I'm always trying to practice my French with people. So I said, ça va, to the man. He said, impec. And I said, well, that is one I want to use. And then when I got to the other side of the security check-in, where they scan you and all that, the guy on the other side asked me, he said, ça va? And I said, impec. And it was one of the first times I used something within 3 seconds of learning it, and it felt good. I recommend you guys do the same thing. So if someone says, how are you? Don't just say très bien. Come on, you can do better than that. Impec. And send me an email. Let me know how it goes. I love hearing about that. Another 2 are things that I haven't seen. In fact, the other 3 I haven't seen before, and I've written them down for differing reasons. First is an idiom. In French, it's boire la tasse, which literally means to drink the cup, and it means to accidentally swallow like seawater or pool water or something. Boire la tasse, drink the cup. Quite like that. Don't know how I'm going to, inject that into my regular conversation, but an idiom is always fun to put in your head in case you ever hear it yourself. Another one I wrote down because I'd never heard it before, and it may just fall into the category of untranslatable words that I am obsessed with. And that means, or at least my definition, is a word in another language where you can't give one word to substitute it in English. And this one is a good one. The word is s'ébrouer. S'ébrouer. S-E-B-R-O-U-E-R. And here's what it means. Imagine this. Camille writes, what a dog does to shake the water off his body. Imagine that. What would we say in English? The dog shook himself? It doesn't make sense. Shook the water off his body? There you go. There's 8 words for one in French. I love it. Don't know how I'm going to use that one. I'm actually going to try if I say a dog. It'll be a pretty awkward little comment to make on the street as someone walks by me, but I'm going to give it a go, and I'll let you know how it goes. And the last is an adjective that I don't think I'd heard before, but I like it. You guys might remember last week, I think, I mentioned the word saisissant, meaning stunning. I used that in conversation. I walked out, saw a sunset right after I recorded that episode last week, and I was with the basketball guys, and they were like, oh, isn't it beautiful? I said, ah oui, c'est saisissant. And they were impressed, gotta say. So here's the new one. The word for dazzling is éclatant. E, like the E in cafe with an acute accent, éclatant. So that is an éclatant sunset, I think we could say. Dazzling sunset? Maybe a sequin dress. I don't know. You guys use it. Send me an email. Let me know how it goes. And check in with FrenchToday.com/earful6. Get that 10% discount. As for me, I've just finished the first episode of Season 6 of the Earful Tower. If you weren't in the room when this podcast started, 500,000 downloads is something worth celebrating. And starting Season 6 is my first way of celebrating it. But what I really want to do is have an event in Paris to celebrate. I've been thinking about getting some kind of boat, going down the river. I don't know, inviting all the listeners along. Watch this space. Go and check out my Instagram or my Facebook page where I'm going to be mentioning all this stuff, and hopefully come and join the party. So, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you guys on Thursday. Not Monday, Thursday. I'll see you on Thursday, And once again, a big thank you to everyone who's been involved. Today's guest, Diana, and all you listeners, Patreon supporters and sponsors. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine. Au revoir.